Lord just told me to look up the definition of the word wisdom. And it literally means the ability to use your knowledge coupled with your experience to make good decisions and sound judgment. And so wisdom is knowledge that's either gained by experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that's why testimony is so powerful, especially when you're ministering to somebody who's maybe an unbeliever.
Yep.
They can have lots of arguments and opinions about who they think a higher power God is or whatever, but they cannot explain your experience in an intimate connection and relationship with God. They can't explain that away.
Right. Well, they can't tell you, I mean, they can doubt whether an experience happened, but they ultimately can't tell you that didn't happen. Because it was your experience, right? It happened to you. So, yeah.
Right. And actually, it's funny. This is something that like we used in Narcotics Anonymous when I was in that 12-step program.
Mm-hmm.
Is that we only shared our experience. Strength and hope is what they called it, because they recognize that the same thought process that ends you in a bad situation is not going to land you in a better situation. That is like the epitome of insanity, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so instead, we make decisions based on experience, not just our own experience, but collective experience in the group by sharing when we're struggling, and then asking others like, hey, have you been through something like this? And if you've been through something like this, how did you navigate through that? Will you share your experience? And then you receive their experience, what you can use, and you leave the rest. And, that's something that we don't see in the church. And I feel like we need to start asking others for their experience in navigating tricky situations, whether it's relationally or, like if I'm struggling in my marriage, the very first thing I want to go do is I'm going to find a couple who has a great marriage. And I'm going to ask them, hey, what's your secret? You know what I mean? Like, I'm going to seek out knowledge and wisdom, and in order to apply that to my life.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
But it all begins biblical wisdom, because there is the wisdom of the world, and that is completely contrary to God's wisdom. Right.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it never fails, Jeff. Here's a really great example. So wisdom in the world's sense would be that before an organization makes a risky financial decision, that they have a certain amount of revenue coming into that organization every month, and that it's reliable, you know what I mean, in order to sustain the health and the longevity of that organization. Well, like, that's not God's wisdom.
Right.
God's wisdom is you don't hoard what you have.
Yeah.
You sow and you'll receive a harvest.
Yeah. And sometimes he's like, put all your eggs in this basket. And you're like,
yes. And
are you sure about that?
Right.
Yeah.
And there are going to be things where like, it looks like what you're doing is really foolish, but it's really wise, because you're listening to God, you're obeying him, you're being humble, recognizing that you don't know the beginning from the end like he does, and saying, okay, I trust you to know what's best for me in this situation. And then it actually drives us into greater dependence on him to come and break through for us. And then when he does, that increases our faith for the next thing that he asks us to do, right? A friend of mine, he's an older gentleman, love him to death. His name is Richard. He said that one time he had heard that a miracle, a good definition for miracle is a supernatural happenstance that increases your faith for the next supernatural thing that God wants to do. And I'm like, you know what? That's right. Because if you see God do it one time, then the next time he asks you to do something or you're depending on him, you'll believe not just for that, but believe for greater.
Can you give that definition one more time?
That a miracle can be defined as a supernatural happenstance that produces a greater level of faith for the next supernatural event to happen.
I love that, because I think sometimes when we can kind of limit even what our definition of a miracle is. So we go, okay, what's a miracle? Somebody getting healed, limb growing out, eyesight getting restored. Yes, but financial provision, that when you prayed and God came through and boom, you get a miscellaneous or an anonymous check in the mail. Or, it could be a myriad of different things. Getting a job that you absolutely needed, that you knew would be like a game changer, like those can be miracles too, because those will increase your faith, where you're like, man, like God did that. What else can he do? Anything that produces, according to that definition, anything that produces within you if God could do that, what else could he do? Like that would fall, a lot would fall under that definition that your friend gave.